Last video I talked about Clock Tower, an underrated yet flawed game that helped pave the way for survival horror games to come. And while it is still less talked about than its peers, it still has a healthy community of people who talk and discuss about it. But what is less known is its sequel, Clock Tower 2. Or just Clock Tower if you're in North America. Yeah, this is the first game that was released outside of Japan, and since the first game stayed Japan exclusive, this one was preemptively retitled to just Clock Tower to alleviate confusion amongst consumers, but really it just created more confusion in the long run, especially when the spin-off Clock Tower Ghost Head was retitled to Clock Tower 2 The Struggle Within. Eventually the series would merge by the time Clock Tower 3 came out, being called Clock Tower 3 in all releases of that game, but yeah, that's how it is. After the success of the first game, they immediately began brainstorming ways to develop a sequel to the original Clock Tower. And eventually the development team saw trailers for the first Resident Evil game and were so impressed with the 3D graphics of that game, they decided to shift focus to developing it for a 3D console. Lots of consoles were considered, but eventually they made the coin toss to develop it on the Sony PlayStation, a console which at the time had an uncertain future given the fact that Sony was a new contender in the 5th generation of the console wars. They weren't simply aiming to create a game that was scarier than the original. Oh no. They were aiming to create the scariest possible game they could with the materials they have, to hopefully challenge Resident Evil as the domineering series of the survival horror genre. So is this game worthy of standing side by side with the titans of the horror gaming world? Or is its fate of obscurity well deserved? Well, let's stop wasting time and dive back into the depths of the mechanical nightmare once more.
Here it is, the Barrows Mansion. We have to go there and look around, or we'll never solve the mystery of Scissorman.
You've got to be joking. It's way too dangerous.
As long as he's alive, we're not safe anywhere, Doctor.
One after another, the horrifying murders continue. Who'll make it through this game of murder alive? Clock Tower.
Professor Barton? Professor Barton? Professor Barton? What on earth are you doing, Professor?
The game starts off with Jennifer Simpson from the first game and a new character, Helen Maxwell, in Professor Barton's office, as Jennifer is being hypnotized to recover her memories from the first game.
She's not ready to remember the murders yet.
Helen, the Clock Tower murders are fascinating research material for me.
That's right, a douchebag.
We then learn that Helen is now the legal guardian of Jennifer since, that last adoption didn't turn out super well, and Helen decides she's had enough and leaves. We take control of Professor Barton and we get a chance to explore around the university, talking to the workers around and learning more about our surroundings and what has happened in the time that has passed. Later, we encounter some investigative journalists who question the professor about the investigation of the Clock Tower murders, as it's referred in-game, with him stating that Jennifer's statements about what happened are unreliable as the Scissorman does not exist.
Huh?
He claims later on that he thinks that some crazed maniac just so happened to use scissors to slash up his victims, and it's like, isn't that what Scissorman is? A crazed maniac with a giant pair of scissors? Granted, they would have no idea about the satanic cultist shit that happened, but that's pretty much like saying,
Actually, that's not a girl. That's what Tolulo affects Sarah.
Here, depending on how many times you talk to this one guy, Harris, you can play as either Helen or Jennifer later on. Barton is then called back to his office as he gets ready to talk to Edward, a kid that was supposedly the survivor of the Clock Tower murders, but has lost all memories of the event due to the shock. Barton gets ready to ask him some questions, and we're done with the prologue chapter. Off to the first intermission. The way this game is structured is that first you will play an intermission where you'll get a chance to go to different locations to talk to different characters, usually to get more information or to trigger the setup for the next scenario. I'll explain what scenarios are in a second, but all you need to know for now is that scenarios will contain the meat of the gameplay that is to come. We'll also meet Gots, the investigator of the Clock Tower murders, who also doesn't believe in the Scissorman for some godforsaken reason, and we'll get to learn more about the conditions of everyone, including a peek into Jennifer's room filled with pixelated pictures of things I hope are family and friendly. And if you're playing as Jennifer, you'll encounter Nolan, who has something very special to say to Jennifer. The official manual says that Nolan is 26 and Jennifer is 15. After a while, you'll finally end back up at the university where the first scenario will happen. Chances are, even if you haven't played the original, you've seen the box art, so you pretty much know what's gonna happen next.
What's wrong?
Help! Someone is following me!
Some kind of weirdo?
Scissorman's back, baby, and this time he's more aggressive than ever. This is where scenarios come back into the picture. They contain the meat of the gameplay, collecting items and solving puzzles whilst hiding when the Scissorman shows up. Except now they've added a lot of things to spice things up. Scissorman is no longer solely restricted to popping out of designated spots. And if you take too long in a stage, Scissorman will start looking for you as you hear the new and refined sound of his scissors. Hiding spots are now more plentiful than ever, scattered all across the map, with a big catch being that each one has a random chance of just flat out not working, and the more times you use a spot, the less likely it'll be effective the next time you use it. Luckily, this game will provide you with limited one-time use items that are always guaranteed to work, with the only catch being that they're limited one-time use items. So not only do you have to worry about Scissorman popping up in places you don't expect, but you'll also want to manage your time to limit the amount of times you'll encounter Scissorman. Now, if you've seen or played the first game, you're probably worried about this new system given how slow that game could get. But luckily, this game has plenty of gameplay improvements outside of the chases that streamline the experience by a ton. First of all, your walking speed is much faster than it was before, which is a neat plus. But the real blessing here is the ability to run without losing your health. Thank the heavens! Not only that, but going up and down stairs doesn't take a million years to do. I cannot express how grateful it feels to have this after the slogfest that was stairs in the first game. Also, this game has mouse support, which for this type of game is also really neat too, considering the original game didn't even have it, even though the Super Nintendo did have a peripheral for mouse controls. It can take a little bit to get used to having to click repeatedly to get your character running instead of relying on shoulder buttons, but once you get the hang of it, damn does this feel much better. On top of that, the way scenarios break up the game means you won't be exploring a gigantic location anymore. Instead, you'll be exploring smaller locations that usually take between 20 to 30 minutes to complete on a blind playthrough. Gaps between locations are no longer that huge, and there are plenty of doors that are marked, so getting to a specific location is much easier this time around. First scenario is pretty easy. You just pick up a few items, including an optional one to get the best ending, you make your way out, and you're on to your next transmission. In the prologue chapter, you'll get an option to give the demon idol, that thing from the first game, to either Professor Sullivan or a guy named Rick, who served the Barrows family prior to the events of the Clock Tower murders. Depending on who you selected, the demon idol will go to a different person, and Gotts or Nolan will ask if they will retrieve the statue from Rick. This is pretty simple. If you gave it to Rick, say yes. If you gave it to Sullivan, say no. And you'll get to play either through the library or Rick's house. I personally found Rick's house a bit more interesting because not only do you get some more lore on the Barrows family, but also this happens. Anyways, yada yada yada, and you're off to your next transmission. Godstar Nolan will have a discussion with whoever you chose for first scenario, recapping the events that have just happened. And with the newly acquired information of the Barrows family history, they deduce that the only way to stop Scissorman is to go to the Barrows castle in England that they lived in prior to living in Norway. You'll have to talk to the other characters around, and they are surprisingly chill about the idea of going to a place where a murderer may stalk and or kill them. It makes a little bit of sense in Jennifer's route since she's under the impression Scissorman won't be able to follow them so far away. But in Helen's route, she straight up says, yeah, y'all are gonna die if you come with us. We're trying to find a way to destroy a serial killer, so you probably should stay behind. And then they're like, ooh, how fun. And inevitably, they all get plucked down, so yeah, dumbasses. It starts getting dark and they prepare to start camping until Helen notices that Jennifer is missing and immediately orders everyone to head to the castle right away. On Jennifer's side of things, she's locked up in what appears to be a library as the Scissorman approaches, only for him to stop and reveal his true identity.
Where are we? Where is everyone? What's that costume?
He told me. He told me that if I kidnap you, he will give you to me.
And that would be 2 for the pedo count. Helen and the others enter the castle, and as they approach, the floor collapses, knocking Helen out, and as she wakes, she finds that not only is the main entrance inaccessible, but everyone else is gone. So she heads out. This is the Barrows Castle, easily the longest part of the game. This is where all of your actions in all of the previous scenarios will come into play and make certain endings accessible. If you picked up the flashlight as Helen in the first scenario, you'll be able to find a map in the fireplace. If you found the oil tank as Jennifer, you'll be able to access a room where the original Scissorman resides, and even get to rescue Helen, who's locked up in this goofy-ass treasure chest for some reason. In the same room, if you play as Helen, you'll just find Nolan and some balls in that chest. During Helen's route, we finally catch up to the Scissorman, who has Jennifer in a weird-looking cross, getting ready to slice her up, which you will need to shoot at him to succeed.
Did it hit him?
Scissorman escapes as Helen makes sure that Jennifer is okay, before chasing after Scissorman. Scissorman is then revealed to be Professor Barton, who explains that he was so allured by the case, he decided to dress up as a Scissorman and kill other people. With that out of the way, Helen makes it out and greets Jennifer, and the game is finally over. And... wait, the ending? Yeah, on my first playthrough, I missed a bunch of things that is required to get the best ending, which requires a ton of stuff that needs to be done, including the aforementioned best ending items from the first scenario. Also, if you want to get the best ending in the game, you'll have to walk around in circles for a bit until the game decides that an object or item crucial to getting it will be interactable or not. Like this bookshelf that you need to put the copper book in to get it to move, but you can't do that unless you look at the scratch marks next to it. Sure, the first game had similar issues, but this area gets a bit egregious with it, as you just kinda have to be thorough with every room you get. And even then, there's a chance that there was a small little thing that the game finally lets you interact with without telling you. Finally, you encounter the true culprit of this case.
So, it was you, Edward.
I guess the secret is finally out, Jennifer. But my name isn't Edward, it's Dan.
Okay, hold on. First of all, Dan looked like a grotesque giant baby, and second of all, he was immolated when Jennifer was making her escape. The intro cutscene even depicts his event, so how did this turn into that? Anyways, now is the time to show off the epic conclusion.
Come here, you scissor-fingered little runt. Just try it.
spell being broken and Scissorman into the void, the building collapses, and Jennifer is rescued by Helen and Gotts.
Helen!
And if you're playing as Jennifer, this happens.
You know, you're tough.
No, you're just weak.
Now, unlike the first game where things would shift and move around on each playthrough, everything stays in the same location, which is, I guess, for some, makes achieving certain endings a lot easier, but personally, I found it a lot less exciting to go back and see what I missed, since there's not a whole lot of secrets to discover this time around. And the only real meaningful difference you can see with multiple playthroughs is the second scenario, which isn't much incentive either way, even with the choice of 2 characters. Now, that's not to say there aren't secrets. If you complete all of the endings, you get to access extras in the Pathlets section of the main menu, that gives you access to alternative costumes for both Jennifer and Helen, and a sound test with all the game's soundtrack, including some that went unused. It also includes some of the dumbest audio tracks I have ever heard in a video game, and I love it.
You're pretty tough. You know that?
Tough? You're just a wimp. Just a wimp. なるほど、こういうことになるんだ。
And so yeah, that was Clock Tower 2. While I'd say it's better consistently, I don't think it reached any of the highs the first game did. Still though, I'd say this is a solid point-and-click adventure worth checking out given its short length and quality of life improvements over the first game. Whether you're a fan of the original or a newcomer to the series, this is a solid game to check out.